Good afternoon. I call to order the Lake Havasu City Council work session on Tuesday, February 28th, 2023 at 4:45 p.m. If you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Ms. Williams, if you please call the roll.
Council members Nancy Campbell. Here. Michelle Lynn. Here. Cameron Moses.
Here.
Jenny Koch. Here. Jim Dolan.
Here.
Vice Mayor David Lane.
Here.
Mayor Kal Sheehy.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, item 4 is our public hearings. 4.1 is a presentation of the Lake Havasu City Partnership for Economic Development Housing Needs Assessment. Mr. Gray?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. James Gray with Partnership for Economic Development. Before I introduce Rick, I'd like to take a quick moment to thank Mayor Sheehy and Mojave County Assessor Jeannie Kench. They worked out an agreement to get over a 10-year data from the county that saved us $10,000. That's a lot of data, and it saved us a lot of money in this. So I really appreciate their work of doing that for the study. And then I'd also like to thank Luke Steele and Desert Land Group. They donated $3,500 to track rental units and then also organize MLS data to reinforce the county data, which I think was very helpful. So those two things together created a lot more data for the analysis than what we would have originally had to go with. So thank you very much for that. And now I will introduce Rick. Rick Merritt is the president and one of the founders of Elliott D. Pollock and Company, a real estate and economic consulting firm that provides consultation on all aspects of the Arizona economy with specialization in real estate. Mr. Merritt advises state and local governments and private parties on a variety of issues, including economic impact of development projects, taxation, affordable and workforce housing, real estate analysis, financial feasibility, and economic development strategies. Some of the notable consulting studies, the economic and fiscal impact of the Arizona Diamondbacks. Rick was not on the field in '98 when they won the championship, but he did do the impact. So we're thankful for that. The economic and fiscal impact of Chase Field in downtown. The economic and fiscal impact of Arizona Tourism and the Sports Authority. The entity charged with constructing a multi-purpose stadium for the Fiesta Bowl and the Arizona Cardinals in Glendale. He is also a notable study, the Arizona Affordable Housing Profile, a study funded by HUD and the Arizona Department of Housing, which examined the affordability housing inventory in each community and county and the state. And then finally, the City of Sedona Housing Needs Assessment and a 5-year action plan. And on a personal note, before we bring Rick up, he's been exceptional to work with, and his whole team, Danny, they've been really great. They have a lot of knowledge of working throughout Arizona. So please welcome Rick.
Thank you very much, James. It's great to be here in front of you, Mr. Mayor, and the rest of the council. And we'll get right into the study and let you know where we think we're going at this point. So the real purpose of the study is to evaluate and recommend an approach to addressing affordable housing, but taking into account the specific challenges that face the region. What I want to do is go through some demographic characteristics of the community, a lot of which you probably are familiar with. Get into a little bit of the economy here, and then talk about housing. So first of all, this is the latest data on the population of Mojave County and the various communities in the county. And you see Lake Havasu is at about 58,500 people. You've grown by about 6,000 people over the past 10 years or so. And that equates into demand for 2,700 housing units, somewhere in that range. So you're building more than that. We're talking about the permanent population of the community, doesn't take into account winter visitors and people that aren't here permanently. So there's a lot more people here than just beyond the 58,000 people that are recognized in these charts. The average household size and median age, as you're aware, the median age is well above the Arizona average. The average household size is below the Arizona average, and it's pretty consistent with what you see throughout Mojave County. Median incomes are below the Arizona average, slightly below the Arizona average overall. The one thing we take a look at is the renter-occupied housing units. The households make less than $40,000 a year, so that's where you really run into issues about affordability of housing. Household income growth has been pretty good over the last 3-4 years. You can see the average incomes are going up, median incomes are going up, and all pretty consistent with what we find across the state of Arizona. Poverty is basically an income about $25,000 for a family or a household. It's what the federal government considers the minimum amount of dollars that it needs to just make it through the day. So you have less poverty here than the state of Arizona, less poverty than is found throughout Mojave County. So a little bit of a positive note there, but still there are 6,000 people that are considered in poverty in the community. Educational attainment, this is one area we take a look at quite closely. And you can see we really take a look at bachelor's degree and higher, and you're about a little bit more than half of what the statewide average is. So not a lot of higher education here above a bachelor's degree or higher. So your population forecast, and right now we're in the middle of forecasting from the Arizona Office of Economic Opportunity. And they've provided a new county forecast, which is a little bit more aggressive than what they had back in 2019, but they haven't done the forecast for the individual communities. That won't be out until September. So we've taken some guesswork on that, but you can see that what is expected is a very slow population growth over the next 18 years, about 2,600 people only. Once again, that is the permanent population, not the seasonal population. So we'll talk about that a little bit more, but it works out to an average of only 67 new housing units a year, where you've been doing much more than that over the past 10, 12 years. You've been averaging 300-400 units a year. So we have some question as to how accurate this is at this point. We won't know until we get those new forecasts in September or so. So I want to talk a little bit about the economy. And as you're all aware, things are a little up in the air as to, are we going to have a recession? Are we not going to have a recession? So I wanted to go through a few things and just what we're seeing right now. So unemployment, you took a pretty good hit during the pandemic. And you can see you're leading way above the Arizona average in this particular case over that time frame. You came down pretty quickly, and now you're in roughly the 3% range, which is basically full employment. We do a calculation called the location quotient. It's a very simple calculation. It takes a look at what your economy is like compared to Arizona. And if you take, for instance, construction, we divide your 9.5% in construction by the 6.7% that's in Arizona, and that gets you a location quotient of 1.43. That means you have a greater percentage of your employment in that particular industry than the state of Arizona. So we can go down the list and you can see construction is very strong here. Consumer services, which is restaurants for a large part, also includes like hair salons, probably boat sales, things of that nature. Healthcare, you have the hospital here, so there's a strength there. Hospitality and tourism is one of your big ones, obviously. You do have manufacturing here, which we don't see a whole lot in the non-urban areas of the state. So you have some manufacturing here, which generally pays higher wages, which is a good thing to have. And then retail, you of course are strong in retail as well. Major employers, I'm not exactly sure how accurate this is, but it's what was put out from the Maricopa Association of Governments. They do a statewide analysis, and this goes back probably to 2019, but you can see the medical center is the largest Sterilite Corporation. Then you get into the unified school districts like Havasu City. And then there's a lot of retail and some healthcare, things like that, consumer services that are in there. So a pretty good broad-based employment base you have. We take a look at labor force participation because if you don't have the labor force here to serve the population, you're going to end up with the situation you're in now where employment is a problem for many of your businesses. And you can see here the labor force participation rate, we showed about 50% for the city, whereas Arizona is pushing up in the 60% range. So it really is an economic issue that you need employment to make the economy work, to provide the services that all your residents require. So it's something we keep an eye on. And obviously we're having a lot of difficulty today with employment throughout the country and the state. Across the country, there's 10, 11 million jobs available and 5 million people on unemployment. So twice as many jobs as people are currently unemployed. They can't get filled for whatever reason, and you're probably having somewhat of the same situation here. The labor force growth has increased since 2013 or so after the effects of the Great Recession. So you are seeing the labor force increase. The question is whether that's enough to really provide the services that you need. You've seen some pretty good bumps in taxable retail, restaurant and bar sales. This has happened pretty much across the state and large parts of the country. Coming out of the pandemic, people had a lot of money to spend. They weren't spending money that they were in prior years. Or prior to during the pandemic, and so there's big bumps in across the state in taxable sales, and you can see the percent increase in restaurant and retail bar sales are up about 34%, and they've continued into 2022 as well. So a lot of good news in that respect, and you can see once again per capita taxable sales, you're at about 50% higher than the countywide average, and the same for restaurant and bar sales, a little bit less than 50% increase. So you're capturing well beyond what your you would normally expect, at least across the county. So you are a center of retail activity here. Obviously, the tourism industry really adds to that. So we want to talk a little bit about housing and where you stand in your housing market. Home ownership is high, higher than the Arizona average. That's great. That's what you want to see, the stability in the community. In terms of tenure, the occupied and renter occupied, the percentages, you can see that the renter-occupied housing market is about 28% compared to about 35% for Arizona. So we're starting to see that you don't quite have the same mix as other communities or the average of Arizona, and that's something we're we'll talk about a little bit more. Occupancy status. About the census, at least, recognizes that about 23% of your housing units are vacant. They can be vacant for a lot of reasons, just turnover and rent, houses that for sale that aren't occupied, things of that nature. But you're a lot higher in vacancy than the state, as you can see. And when you look at how the vacancy occurs, once again, units that are for rent and not occupied, you go down. Okay, seasonal, recreational, and occasional use, about 6,500 units is probably larger than that. And the census is very vague on what they mean by other vacant. So I would almost put that into that category as well as a seasonal type of occupancy. But essentially about 20% of your permanent housing stock is used for seasonal purposes, which is about 6,500 units out of 33,000 units. And what that translates into is you get about 14,000 more people here, pretty conservatively, I think, in the winter months, as opposed to your permanent population. So that adds to your 56,000, you're pushing up to 70,000 people here during the seasonal months. And these are the vacant units by type. So about 23% of your single family units are vacant or considered vacant, probably mostly seasonal. And you can go down the list and you can see that's pretty consistent across all types of housing units. And the mobile homes are even pushing up against 60% considered vacant. We got this information from the Mojave County assessor, and I want to make sure, there's some conflicting information between the census and how the county recognizes different types of housing. And the census is a survey. It's a 5-year average of what is going on in the community. This is probably a little more accurate, but it shows that there's non-primary residents, which are your seasonal residents, where the person who owns the home is sent a bill that's not at where the residence is. So it could be sent out of state, could be just sent to a local address here, and somebody owns maybe 2 or 3 additional houses beyond what they live in. So there's a lot of non-primary residents in the condo market. You can see the primary residents are only about 25% of the condo, and then there's a large number of rental units. Mobile homes, and you go down the list, about a third of single-family units the county recognizes as non-primary residents. So once again, a seasonal or a second home for that particular owner. And only about 8% of the rental units are single-family. The thing we really start to focus on, once again, is apartments, which is really where you want to provide your rental units. And you can see we consider apartments to be from 5 units in a building up to 50 or more units in a building. And you can see at the bottom there, you're about 8.4% of your total units are in apartment units, compared to about 15.6% for the state. So once again, about half as many apartment units as you would expect to see in a typical city throughout Arizona. And this is another way of looking at some of these rental units. Hope this isn't a little too confusing to take a look at, but you have 2,765 total multifamily units. About 2,000 of those are occupied. And then you have condo units, and then you have occupied rental units. And once again, it comes down to about 4.1% are occupied rental units out of your total inventory. And once again, looking at Arizona, about 12.5%. So you're about a third of what we'd expect to see in a typical city across Arizona. And here's just another way of looking at it. When you look at the owner-occupied units and the renter-occupied units, the same type of thing. You just don't have the same number of units that we find across Arizona. I'm sorry to keep hammering on this, but that's the numbers I think that are most important to really recognize. Once again, your residential building permits, you had big years during leading up to the Great Recession, dropped off quite a bit, quite significantly, starting in the Great Recession, then picked back up, and you're still producing a good number of units each year. This is a permit activity, most of it being in the single-family market. Not much in terms of what we consider multifamily, a lot of duplex activity going on. Short-term rentals. We've taken a big look at other cities that we've looked at, and short-term rentals have become obviously very popular, and they've become a bit of a difficult issue for many tourist communities. What this shows is you have 2,230 available units across the city, and the days available is how many days during the year those units may be available. So if you, and this source that we use, AirDNA, considers a property that is used basically full-time is one that's more than 180 days available. So if you look at that, you have about over 1,000 units, all 1,100 units that are basically available on a full-time basis for short-term rentals. So that's taking a large part of the market out of the rental market. And booked units are just how many units were particularly used during the past year. Most end up to be in the shorter term days available for some reason. And here's a display of where those units are located and how many there are. This sometimes overstates what those units are, because there can be, sometimes we find boutique hotels in there. We see timeshares in those numbers. We haven't cleaned the data because it's not particularly available, but it just gives you an idea of the dispersion of rental units, short-term rental units across the city. And once again, this has caused tremendous concern with a lot of tourist-oriented communities like Sedona, where they've really taken an effort to try to regulate them. So we did an inventory of apartment complexes that we could find throughout the community, getting down to 5 and 6 unit complexes. We came up with 875 total apartment type units. We may have missed some of those. Hopefully we've gotten most of them, but it's for the most part, it's a relatively small number compared with their overall inventory of 33,000 housing units in the community. Most of the units are relatively old. We come up with a median age of 1972 when they were built. So it's a pretty old inventory and it's pretty modest. And the vacancy rate has just dropped like a rock over the past 4 or 5 years. You're at basically 1.5% vacant at this point, which is obviously well under full occupancy. And the availability of units really becomes an issue that continues to push up rents because landlords can get more rent because the demand's there. So it is a real issue in terms of making enough room for your employees and your workers as they come into the community. This is where we get to the point where we start to look at what the demand is for affordable units. And the criteria that is established by the Housing and Urban Development is you should not be spending more than 30% of your income on housing, and that includes utilities. So based on the census data we have, there's about 3,000 units 3,000 households that spend more than 30% of their income on housing. And of that amount, about 1,300 spend more than 50% of their income on housing. So once again, tremendous demand. You can see, it's at this point, it's across the state. You're pretty equal to what we find across the state. So it's not unusual, but it is an issue, obviously, that communities have to deal with. And then we just took a quick look at the income ranges of the households that pay more than 30%. And as you can see, if you make less than $20,000 a year, 93% of all households are paying more than 30%. You can just go down the line. And even people making up to $50,000 a year are paying a large part of their income on that. So once again, those are the numbers we really take a look at. There are low-income housing tax credit projects in the community. These were sometimes financed also by U.S. Department of Agriculture programs, financing and tax credit programs that they have, since you're considered a rural community, a non-urban community. About half of all the conventional apartment complexes we found in the city, half of the units fall into this category. So there has been an effort in the past to provide this type of housing. There is a real need, but these tax credit programs are highly competitive, and you're competing with every community across the state, and a lot of these credit projects go to the more highly populated areas like Tucson and Phoenix. Just quickly, here are some project limits for tax credit projects. You can see the area median income calculated by HUD is about $63,000. And if you make 80, 60, 50% of that, that's where you fall into the income limits where you'd be eligible for those units. And then you can see below, for instance, a 60% household income with 2 bedrooms, which would be a 4-member family, would pay $841. So once again, it's difficult to find 2-bedroom units in the community for that kind of income. We don't have real good information on fair market rents or market rents in the community. So we go back to HUD, they establish fair market rents, and then they make their calculation for lower income families from this. But you can see, depending on what your zip code is, for a 2-bedroom unit range from $1,100 to $1,200 a month. So fairly steep for a lot of families in the community. We looked at what the typical wages are for different occupations and what they can afford in terms of rent. And if you look at the last column, that's really where we're looking at what the rent would be. You take utilities off of that, off the middle column, and you come up with the affordable rent. So you even get into firefighters, construction workers, people of those occupations, and even those occupations which are fairly, or at least reasonably well paid, will have difficulty finding housing in the community, particularly with the vacancy levels that are currently being found. For high school and elementary school teachers, those are median wages, so they're not starting wages. And we've heard from the high school, talk about that, or the school district and their difficulties that they have in attracting teachers. We looked at what's called the Housing Opportunity Index. This is the National Association of Home Builders and Wells Fargo put out this index. And what it measures is the percentage of households that can afford the median priced house in the community. And you can see, I compared this to Greater Phoenix. We've dropped off. We used to be one of the most affordable areas. There was a big competitive advantage for Greater Phoenix. And you can see, just a couple of years ago, we were up in the 60% range, where 60% of all households could afford the median priced house. we've now dropped off, and you've dropped off as well. So it's really a big issue that we're finding across the country. Here's the major metropolitan areas and where they stand in the Housing Opportunity Index. There are 235 metropolitan areas in the country, and you can see you're ranked 130, so you're about in the middle of the overall ranking. But you get into Prescott, Phoenix, and Flagstaff in particular. They're one of the least affordable markets in the country at this point. And it's not so much individual price of housing and things like that. You can go to California and these prices would be much higher. It's a relationship between income and median housing price that sets these numbers. So we've run into this issue obviously across the state for the most part. We've also taken a look at the median income, $63,000. At 28% of income, the monthly payment would be a little bit less than $1,500 at a 6% rate, which I think you may be able to get close to that now, although we expect those rates to go back up. You put down a down payment, you do the calculation, and for a household making the median income, they can afford a $270,000 house. Difficult to find that in the market today. And here's the housing data that James mentioned. We got this from the MLS data that he provided, one of his members provided. And you can see single-family housing since 2017 is up 94%. Condos are up 82%. Manufactured homes are up 125%. Now, both of those are still fairly low in price in the $250 range, but they have gone tremendously higher. Townhomes, 46%, and duplexes, about 100%. Now, over that time frame for the western region of the U.S., consumer price index has increased 22%. So housing has just become such a tremendous problem. And the numbers are just telling what the story is at this point. Here's just a graphic that shows, once again, single-family housing and duplexes leading the way there. Townhomes took a big jump in 2022. Condos and manufactured homes are, for the most part, a little flat, but still increasing. We also looked at homeowner housing cost burden, and you can see through this chart that about 4,000 households, or 23% of all your owner households, also pay more than 30% of their income on housing. We don't consider this probably as critical as your renter households, because if you're an owner and you're spending a lot of money on your home, you have options that a renter doesn't have. You can sell your home, you can move, whatever it needs to do. But it certainly is another aspect of the market to take a look at, that housing has become less affordable for even owners. We did talk to the business community with the help of the mayor and putting together a few other people in the community. We talked to one company that told us there's high employee turnover due to high rents relative to wages. There's a limited supply of workers living outside the city to fill jobs. And Lake Havasu is like an island. You don't have a population surrounding you that can come into the city to work without a long commute. For instance, in Sedona, a large number of their employees live in Camp Verde and Cottonwood, and they're 20 minutes away, so they live in the less expensive areas. They work in Sedona. You don't have that option here. And it's something to really keep in mind, that the workers need to be here, and we're hearing that from other people in the business community. We heard the hotel industry is facing similar challenges for entry-level positions, and workers have to share housing units. And short-term rentals are hurting the market. City utility and public safety employees are struggling to find housing. And California is essentially stealing local employees because they pay more in California. The school district, we heard from them on the difficulties they have recruiting people recruiting teachers. And once again, if you don't live in Lake Havasu, you're facing a long commute, and most people don't want to do that. And the hospital in particular is having real difficulties. We're really surprised that they have 295 unfilled positions. They've lost nurses to traveling programs. Their recruiting for entry-level positions is really difficult. They've cited where places like North and South Dakota are paying for people's, for doctors, tuition that they had to pay, the loans that they took out. They're paying much higher wages in North and South Dakota just to get people there. So it really has become a nightmare for the hospital industry in this particular case. And we've talked about it, I think, a little bit, but essential personnel, doctors, nurses, firemen, policemen, and here, we consider essential personnel just people who drive trucks for deliveries, people who work in grocery stores. If you don't have those people, your economy begins to suffer and wages start to increase to attract people here, and that just starts the inflationary pressure again on the community. So in our conclusions, first one is you're expecting relatively slow growth over the next 18, 19 years. We'll have to see if that plays out or not. Your population is much older than the statewide average. Household sizes are smaller. And so we got to take a look and keep track of the labor force participation rate. And interviews with the local business and government representatives demonstrate the difficulties in hiring and retaining employees. Household incomes, particularly for renters, is extremely low at $39,000 on average. And the local economy is still relatively strong. You have above average level of per capita taxable sales. You have certain strengths in your economy. And certainly the tourism market here certainly helps to avoid a loss of income or revenue to the community. In the housing, once again, a modest assortment of apartment complexes. The complexes are old, or the ones that are there, and we didn't find any large complexes built since 1995. Your housing gap is about 3,000 renter households, 4,000 homeowners, and some of those are obviously paying a lot more than that, 50% or more of their income on housing. Just went through, the price of housing has increased dramatically. And lastly, the Housing Opportunity Index, is dropping, and hopefully there is some turnaround in that, but we aren't seeing it at this point. It's been slow to turn around so far. We found, once again, went through what a person could afford, a $273,000 home. In 2022, only 7 homes were sold for less than $273,000 out of 575 single-family sales. In the condo market, it's a little bit better, 53 out of 77, but still the market just isn't there for persons looking to buy. We think the tourist market is likely to keep prices high. That's the unfortunate thing that occurs in tourism communities. Retirement people come here with a lot of money down or pay cash for units, and that pushes up the price once again. We've seen it in other communities as well. Short-term rentals, we've already talked about those. It is a real issue that many communities are having to deal with. We're obviously in the start of probably a housing correction, which may change things to some extent. We don't anticipate a big drop in housing prices, but it may provide some kind of alleviation of issues for some people in the near future. But the lack of affordable rental units will likely persist because of just the demand that's here for rental units. So here's our recommendations. Expand the inventory of affordable workforce housing in Lake Havasu. That's the overall objective. Once again, we've gone through the low amount, small amount of rental apartment complexes are here. And once again, this whole thing is not just a housing issue, it's an economic issue. Providing for the long-term economic growth of the community by having housing for people that will be coming here and providing services. So we recognize that non-urban communities face unique circumstances. We see this in the tourism communities. And you often have limited resources and you face intense competition for the affordable housing dollars. So that's something we have to recognize here. And some communities like Sedona have really put their money where they're talking about housing. And I can talk about that a little bit. But they've made some huge strides in providing for the housing needs of their community. So we think it's important to increase and encourage infill development. I understand a lot of that is going on, and the city has taken steps to increase densities in certain parts of the city, and you allow accessory dwelling units in single-family districts. That's great. That's exactly where you need to go. But beyond that, you need to promote the development of low-income tax credit projects and workforce complexes that may be, actually marketing to developers who build those types of complexes and work with them. And I understand the school district is doing that right now, as a matter of fact. Provide incentives for affordable housing, expedite building plan reviews, waiver of building permit fees, density incentives if you have affordable units in the complex, perhaps providing assistance with the cost of public infrastructure that may be adjacent to the property. Those are the types of things we've seen in a lot of communities across the country. And really, it is important that Lake Havasu City does not charge development fees. Those are big numbers for a lot of communities. I know you cut them out a few years ago, and that is a major benefit of developing here in the community. We suggest conducting an inventory of city-owned land and seeing what may be available for development of housing. You could issue RFPs for the sale or lease of the land. Coordinate with the Mojave Community College and Lake Havasu School District on the availability of excess land. Consider rezoning commercial land to multifamily districts in certain locations, and evaluate the ability of the city to restrict the use of any new accessory dwelling units to long-term lease in excess of 30 days. That would take some legal analysis, but the problem with accessory dwelling units is that they turn into short-term rentals. And this is a perfect place where that can occur. So in some way, we're trying to say, all right, let's make sure that these, any dwelling units, accessory dwelling units that are permitted are subject to a long-term lease and not a short-term. Evaluate and review the city's zoning and building code to determine if they result in an increase in the cost of multifamily development. Implement all restrictions and licensing requirements for short-term rentals that are permitted under state law. It's been a big discussion over the last few years at the state legislature. I think that many people that see difficulty with short-term rentals, they didn't get what they wanted down there, but there are more restrictions now, licensing, paying sales tax, things like that have been implemented by many communities. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with the government property lease excise tax program. These have been used in some of the large cities to promote affordable housing. It reduces the amount of property tax that a housing development would pay. And it's been fairly successful in Phoenix and Tempe, and maybe something for you to take a look at. Our second strategy is to coordinate with Mojave County and the state of Arizona on housing issues, broker an alliance with Mojave County on infrastructure planning, cooperate with the county on seeing if there are sites along Highway 95 that could be appropriate for multifamily development, and investigate the opportunity to bring state land parcels to auction for multifamily purposes. increase the resources to support production of affordable housing. And some cities have, once again, have stepped up to do this. But the suggestions we come up with are dedicating a portion of the sales tax revenues to affordable housing, create a housing fund that could assist them with housing activities, tax on short-term rentals that could be directed to a housing fund, dedicating property taxes for housing, public safety, has been done in other communities. It could be done here as well. You could provide some of the bed tax you currently receive or increase the bed tax for affordable housing. Provide a regular allocation of general fund to a housing fund or housing purposes. And once again, sale or lease proceeds could be used for affordable housing efforts. Staffing, some cities have promoted staff to specifically work with housing issues. There are ways of doing that can minimize your staffing requirements. One is to take a look at working with Housing Solutions of Northern Arizona. They're out of Flagstaff, but I understand they're certified to work in Mojave County. And they currently administer housing programs in Cottonwood, Flagstaff, and Sedona. They assist with establishing community land trusts. So they are a tremendous resource that you could pull into Lake Havasu to help you with your situation. There are a couple additional housing tools to consider. One is a community land trust, which is you could set it up as a separate entity, or it could be within the city. The city of Flagstaff has a community land trust in the city. And what it does is it holds title to land for affordable housing purposes and provides that land at reduced prices. There's hundreds of them now across the country. They've become very popular. And some cities, like Cottonwood, has established a down payment assistance program for city employees that matches their down payment on houses. And this can be set up as a loan or grant, can be forgiven over time, or can be repaid if the home is sold. So there's a lot of other programs we could suggest. There's a lot more aggressive programs that we see in Flagstaff, for instance, and in some of the ski communities in Colorado. There's different legislation that back up a lot of those programs. But these are the ones that, after talking with some of your staff and city people, that we think these are the ones that are probably most appropriate for Lake Havasu City. Once again, we are on very uncertain times. I think we're going to see labor shortages still continue throughout 2023. Material is still an issue from time to time. That may be getting better. We're going to see an above average rate of inflation through 2023 probably. We're going to see more bumps in the federal funds rates, which is going to probably increase mortgage rates and slow down the market. We think the cost of housing may moderate, but vacancy rates may keep rents high. And the demand for housing in Arizona is going to keep growing. There's going to be a shortage. We have a tremendous shortage across the state right now. But we're growing. And just like you're growing, Greater Phoenix, we're getting an influx of semiconductor companies, battery companies that are bringing a lot of jobs into the community. And we're going to see the demand for more housing everywhere in Arizona. So with that, I'm happy to answer questions. I don't know how many of you recognize this guy. This is Karnak the Magnificent. Some of you are too young, probably know who he is, but he answers questions before the answer is actually given to him. So I can't do that, but I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have about it.
Thank you, Mr. Merrick, for the very in-depth detail on the housing challenges that we're having in our community. It is enlightening when you actually have data that goes along with what's occurring here. And we have some strategies that you've outlined that we can potentially take a look at. I've talked to a few of the communities that are doing some of like the housing trusts and those types of things. They don't always work the way they're intended, so we'd have to really work through some of those types of things. But, you've mentioned we've taken all of the abilities for short-term rentals that are allowed by law, but we've put that into our code. We have made the process to get a building permit easy. We are easy to work with, and we still don't get anyone that comes through. What would you say to that challenge? How can we get folks to be interested in coming forward?
Well, I think it probably takes maybe some direct marketing to outside developers to show them what the needs are, and try to get them here and explain the situation. And once again, if you can offer support for them in any way, like you said, even providing them land in some way or other. If the community has land, if the community college has excess land, maybe the state land, you can parcel off some parcels from the state land. Those are long-term issues to try to deal with the state land. But I think it takes an effort to get the word out among everybody else that's having pretty much the same situation as to how critical the situation is here.
Yeah, very good. Do any members of the council have any questions for Mr. Merrick? Any comments? Yeah, Mr. Knudsen.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. Mr. Merrick, you mentioned in one of your slides about short-term rentals and where cities would either encourage or require long-term leases as opposed to short-term leases. Is that the Sedona model, or is there something else there that's out there?
Well, that would be, we're suggesting for accessory dwelling units doing that, ADUs. But Sedona does have a program they just instituted where they are giving $10,000 per year to an owner of a short-term rental for the ability to turn that into a permanent rental. I don't know if that's enough in Sedona to make that much of a difference, but that is one option that like I said, they're the one community that has stepped up. They are partially financing a new apartment complex. They're putting $3-4 million into this apartment complex to bring down the cost of rents. And so they are really taking that. They're probably the worst situation in the state, however, and have many, many resources to fall back on to do those types of things. But they are trying to incentivize turning accessory dwelling units or just any short-term rental into a permanent rental.
Yeah, thank you. Councilmember Dolan?
I have a question. Was there any analysis of as far as the land usage at the moment? And I know we had something come before us at the last council meeting where someone wanted to build an apartment complex, but it wasn't zoned for in that location. And I know we have a lot of locations that are zoned for multifamily, but I've been told a lot of the developers with the tiny homes have already bought those up. Was there any analysis on land available and zoning and how much opportunities there is for that?
Under our budget, which was somewhat limited, we did not look specifically at that, other than there's a lot of small parcels around that probably could be put to those kind of uses, but we didn't look specifically at that aspect.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments before we open the public hearing? All right, this is a public hearing. Would anyone like to address the council on the housing needs assessment study? Yeah, please just make your way to the podium and state your name for the record.
My name is Chad Nelson. So I've been researching and working on projects like this for the past half decade and helped to assemble the land and the project that came before you at the last meeting that was denied. I really... and I can answer your question, Mr. Dolan, that no, the land is not there. It's not there. The only thing you can do is, and if you are going to purchase a piece of land like that that's zoned correctly, you can't make affordable housing because the land is too expensive. There just isn't the land available. Your density model should really be however many units you could build on multifamily land, divided by how many units we need, and that's what your density should increase to. And unfortunately, what you'll find is the project that was before you is probably more your density model for what available land you have left. I don't really feel this, and I don't mean to be facetious, but you guys have had this report since December. And if you would have read it and really dived into it, that project would have passed. It would have passed. I feel like the comments that were made in that meeting, not one comment was made by someone who needs a rental. Everybody that made a comment, they were talking about how they have 3 and 4 RV garages. And where are you going to park all that stuff? Well, guess what? Go by 3140 Kearsage, 95 units. They don't have cars. The parking lot's not full. They don't have side-by-sides. They don't have boats. They don't have trailers. It's not full. The parking is not an issue because they don't have cars. They have to Uber to work. Multiple family members share one car. I was very surprised at what happened at that meeting. I thought all the analysis that was made should have been a slam dunk for you guys. Now, I understand the density was an issue. That was the main problem. But what comes to pass in that report, what you see is that you can't build at such a low density and have it be affordable. And what the city wanted with that complex was a maximum of 2 stories, low density, a pool. There were people that mentioned electric car charging stations. They wanted a park. You know, I can tell you the city really doesn't need affordable housing because it's already here. When you drive to work tomorrow or you drive around your route, whatever you do, look at all of the houses that have 2 and 3 travel trailers and RVs plugged into them. That is your affordable housing. People rent them out. They buy them, plug them into their house, rent them out. So the affordable housing is already there. That's what you got. And that's what you're going to keep getting more of that. And it's sad. In order to make something happen the way that you want it built, you're going to have to subsidize it. So we have a developer that is homegrown in Lake Havasu City, not greedy, trying to do an affordable housing project, studying this data for almost a half a decade. And you guys get 2 hours with it and shut it down. You really need to do some more research. You really need to drive by these other units and see that half the stuff that the people are talking about doesn't exist. When there's 3 and 4 RVs hooked up to a house, you see a lot of riffraff going on around there? They just care about a roof over their head. So subsidies need to happen to make these projects exist. The one last comment that I will make is that there are projects being built to your spec. There's one on Shoshone. It's being built to the way that the community and the city council wants it. They're not rentable. They're too expensive. Why would you pay the amount for an
If you could wrap
apartment?
it up, please.
Yeah, why would you pay the amount for an apartment that you could get a house for? So I think the council needs to stop listening to people that don't need rentals. They need to listen to people that do need rentals and just do a little bit more research. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Sir? Yeah. And just, Mr. Nelson, that project wasn't not approved. It wasn't approved or disapproved. So there's still opportunity for that. But thank you for your comments.
Yeah, I'm Harold Meeks, and I'm a resident here, and I 100% disagree with what he just said. We're not landlocked. We're not LA. We have so much open land all around us. I agree with what the one guy had said before, that we should go to the state and expand our city limits. We aren't stuck in this little box. Arizona's a huge state, and there's plenty of land out there. We need to just grow our city as far as square feet. I mean, out where I'm at, the roads end into the desert, but it doesn't have to. It could keep going and going and going. There's no reason that we have to worry about one lot here or one lot there when we have, instead of this little box, we have all that area out there that we can be building. I just think it's silly. I have no problem with apartments, but I think that we need to think, and we shouldn't scatter things all over. We should have an area where this is where the apartments are, and we should kind of master plan what we want our city to be. I think it's kind of sad how the tiny homes are kind of spread all over. I wish that it would have been an area where it was master planned. I think that just like with our city here, it's so sad to me that all the best views of the lake are commercial property. It just seems so weird. Why wouldn't you have the commercial property up against the hills or somewhere out of view, and then all that pristine area have beautiful homes on it? But, there's nothing we can do at this point, pretty much. But as far as, I think that we're keeping ourselves in a little box. Let's get out of the box and start thinking about expanding our border. And there's no reason that we have to keep the same amount of acreage in our city. Let's expand it. Just like, in Cherry Tree, you see where they've expanded up into Cherry Tree. Well, there's a huge area all around, that nothing's been done to it. So I agree with the one guy. I think we need to look ahead and, get some land from the state and say, these are going to be apartments. We're going to have 5,000 apartment buildings or whatever. Have it set up so it's for apartments. And I know builders from California. I could probably get a builder from California to come here and start putting apartments because he has like 5,000 of his own. It's not a problem. We have the land. We just need to get it from the state. So,
Thank you for your comments.
Hi, my name's Karina Fallon. Not only am I a resident, I have kids in this community. I'm a business owner. My employees will never be able to own a home at the rate that we're headed. In 2019, they could buy a house. What we have done in this community is to be accounted for. And as this gentleman obviously wasn't here for the actual understanding of what that public meeting was, there's a lot of vacant homes. There's a lot of things that are sitting that are actually, just like this gentleman said, able to fill where my employees have been lost. Personally, 7 people that rented for over 7 years were kicked out of homes because the market was too good in the time of a pandemic. How is that okay? As our community, you guys need to stand up for us. Our community should be focused on schools, on parks being built. We need to do, like he said, reach out to the communities that are around that have already experienced the tremendous amount of short-term rentals that is insulting as a homeowner here in this town. The renters need to be here. I'm sorry, I doubt very many of you actually need to rent. The renters need to be
Ms. Fallon,
here.
you have to address the council. So
Okay.
yeah, please address the council.
So-
Thank you.
But again, I'm here because this doesn't seem to be reaching people like me. We need to be, the community that's going to be here needs to be here for a long time. not short term. You heard our growth is small, very small over 20 years. Did that gentleman hear that? No, but you guys did. And you need to protect us because our community isn't going to grow by 5,000 units in the blink of an eye. It needs to be through people that have true heart in our community. If there's developers that are thinking of people in our community, we need to hear them out. I don't need someone from California coming in and building something that doesn't actually stand for our community. So I don't know how it's going to be fixed, but looking at short-term rentals and limiting that to a point that we actually have a community around us that can afford to live here. Not one of my employees can afford every day to live what they need to live, and they're going in the hole. This is not fair. Our community won't be here to provide for them if we can't do something here real quick to subsidize this. So reach to the Arizona, reach out, do what we can, build our schools, build our houses, build our community, not padding pockets, not making investments, our community. So thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to address the council on the housing needs assessment? All right, seeing none, we'll go ahead and close the public hearing for that item.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, can I talk real quick?
Sure, yes.
So I am the developer, and I have shrunk this property down to 78 units now. So it does meet all the requirements, meets all the stipulations, has no issues. And I'm in agreement. We need people for our hospitals. It's great what that guy said earlier. He said, hey, we could get more land. We all know the cost of development. The land is the problem. It costs way too much. You can't go buy a $4 million property, put units on it. It doesn't work. So if we want affordable profit, we want affordable housing, we're going to have to start building up. And that's all I got to say.
Thank you. All right, so we'll go ahead and then close the public hearing. Bring it back to council. Does council have any last minute comments before we adjourn to our next meeting? I would just like to say thank you to Mr. James Gray from the Partnership for Economic Development for taking the lead on this effort. Mr. Merrick, thank you for presenting the data. Again, as I said to my opening remarks, this isn't something that we don't know. We have a feeling for it, but now we have data. And now this data can be taken into the conversations with others to be able to do something. And we can work with local folks in the land that we have. It's a very complex issue, and it's not as easy as expanding our borders or inviting different folks from California to solve this problem. We're going to have to take a multi-legged approach to it. As Mr. Merrick outlined, several strategies that we can look at, but the city is focused on it. We'll continue to remain focused on it to bring some sort of resolution. We will have our regular council meeting in just a couple of minutes to get started, but I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. All right, we are adjourned. We'll see you at 6 p.m.